Welcome. This breakout session is titled Procedural Fairness, a strategy for restoring confidence in courts. If you have any questions for our presenter, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. Also, if you have any technical difficulties, please email info@mnjrc.org or text 612-361-3951. I'll put this in the chat too. I would now like to turn it over to our presenter today.
Good afternoon. Good morning. My name's Kevin Burke. I hope everyone can hear me. How's that?
Cool. We got you.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for putting up with the fact that I am not very good at technology. My name's Kevin Burke. I served as a judge in Hennepin County from 1984 to 2020. And was chief judge through most of the 1990s. My presentation is going to deal with how I think we should build trust in Minnesota courts. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end or comments, criticisms. If you want to put your question or comment in the chat section, so you don't forget it and don't let me off the hook, that would be really very good. Barbara Jordan, the former congresswoman from Texas, once said, "What the people want is an America as good as its promise." And I think that's what people want of their courts. A court that's as good as its promise looks at fairness, respect, as well as efficiency. I think it's a fair criticism, no pun intended, that many courts talk about fairness, but they don't really focus or measure it. They're much more into how efficient are we? And in some instances, they're not very efficient either. There's a lack of trust in public institutions that, although not focused specifically on courts, is very troublesome. If you look at how this erosion of trust is really playing itself out, this is about the federal government. So if you look there in the 1960s, at the high point, 77% of the American public believed that that the people in Washington were trying to do what was right. And you're now down to somewhere around 20%. Public confidence in the Supreme Court has plunged to 18%. Now, there are a variety of surveys. This one is the General Social Science Survey. And if you look at this last slide, just 12% of the women who were surveyed said they had a great deal of confidence in the court in 2022. What you will learn is we not only have a gender gap, but we have a racial gap in how people perceive courts. So this is a chart which basically says the confidence in the Supreme Court, it's not in good shape. And this is about gender, and you'll notice over here, 61% of women used to have, do you approve or disapprove? The percentage who disapprove of women is 61%, men is 49. And then what we also have is a strong partisan gap about looking at the United States Supreme Court. And so you'll see that 73% of Republicans are reasonably supportive of the United States Supreme Court, only 28% of Democrats. There we go. Now, I can't affect what happens with the United States Supreme Court. And no one at this conference is going to change how the United States Supreme Court governs itself, communicates with the public, or makes decisions. But what we definitely know now is the United States Supreme Court drives public attention and support and trust in courts throughout the United States. So if you look at, there's a minimal difference between SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, and local courts. Very, very close. So what does this mean? And what I would suggest it means is this: if you can't change the United States Supreme Court's composition, style of governing, style of communicating, then we in Minnesota for sure need to decouple ourselves from the United States Supreme Court. It's not about we won't follow their decisions. It's just we need a new strategy that ends up saying your local courts, your state courts in Minnesota have their own lane of communicating with the public and trying to build support. If you want to know exactly about this partisan divide, in your opinion, to what extent do you think a judge's ruling is influenced by his or her own personal political views? 75% of the people believe that to a moderate or significant extent, judges make decisions based on their own personal or political views, not about what the law is. That's a pretty cynical view of how judges make decisions. I made a lot of decisions over the 38 years that I served on the bench full time. And a lot of these decisions really don't have anything to do with personal or political views, but there's a cynicism about how we operate. Some of that has nothing to do with what judges do. Some of it has to do with other people who will feed into the perception that judges are just political hacks. For example, it is frequent that journalists will describe a federal judge with an Obama appointee, a Trump appointee. You'll see a lot less of that in terms of how Minnesota journalists report about Minnesota judges. When I first got appointed, there might be a reference to I was appointed by Governor Perpich, but after a while that went away, and you don't really see that very often about Minnesota journalists reporting who appointed you as being significant. It is no surprise to anyone who's here that we have a serious problem with race in our country, and particularly how racism affects the justice system. About 6 in 10 Black adults say racism and police brutality are extremely big problems for Black people in the United States, according to the Pew Research Center. If you look at confidence in the criminal justice system, only about 5% of Black adults have a great deal of confidence. Interestingly enough, the Gallup shows that only 4% of white adults, but then if you look at quite a lot, you're at 11% of Black adults and 17% of white adults, and then Hispanics are all the way up to the 30s in terms of their confidence in the criminal justice system. Do you agree or disagree with the following statements? treat people with dignity and respect. Overall, this is about state courts now, not the United States Supreme Court. Overall, the number is 66%, but with African Americans, it's only 50%. Committed to protecting individual and civil rights, 69% of overall number state courts again, but only 54% of African Americans. Listen carefully to people who appear before them. Only 45% of African Americans believe that state courts do that. And then a really dismal number are unbiased in their case decisions. Only 35% of African Americans believe that that's true. How well does each of the following describe state courts? Fair and impartial, 60%. Overall, 42% with African Americans. Provide equal justice to all. Only 32% of African Americans believe that courts, state courts, which would be a national survey of state courts. So this number is not necessarily accurate for Minnesota, but I would caution people to understand that it may not be that far off when it comes to Minnesota. So this is why I think it's not that far off. Several years ago, I decided that I was not chief judge then, but I wanted to know, how do people who come into the Hennepin County District Court view how the judges are operating? 580 some defendants filled out a survey. The survey was pushed, for want of a better description, by bribing people with Snickers bars. If you fill out my survey, you get a Snickers bar. And so a lot of people filled out the survey. The judge made sure I understood the decision. And you'll notice that there's a statistically different view by blacks versus whites. The judge listened to my story, cited my story. Again, a statistically different view of blacks who appear in the Hennepin County District Court. And if you go back to my prior slide about listen carefully, it sure looks like there's a difference, again, statistically different, 66.23%, this is a 9-point scale, on whites, and 5.39 when it comes to blacks. To make sure that people weren't gaming to get their Snickers bars, the next question was, I felt intimidated by the court, and on this one, you wanted a low number. And again, you see a statistically different thing with blacks. I felt nervous in court. There really isn't a statistically difference there. Did you get the outcome you thought was fair? Close to statistically different. The judge treated my lawyer just as fairly as he or she treated the prosecutor, and we're back into blacks who appear in the Hennepin County District Court do not believe that judges are treating their lawyer the same as a prosecutor. And again, you look at the next one, the judge listened to my attorney just as much as he or she listened to the prosecutor, big difference. And then if you look at cases were resolved in a timely manner, we're not doing very well. Now, every year, every 2 years, the National Center for State Courts does a survey of on state court public attitudes towards state courts. And if you look at the top chart, fair and impartial, 57% of the people believe that state courts are fair and impartial, a weak number. If you look down at the bottom, 39% describe state courts as intimidating places. My message to judges and to court administrators, to prosecutors, and to public defenders, the people who run the justice system, is we need to reduce the intimidation that people have when they come to court. And the intimidation can really begin, for legitimate reasons, at the magnetometers. If you go into many courts, state courts, federal courts, there are magnetometers. Take off your belt, take off your shoes. And some of the people who are doing that job are wonderful at it. But some contribute to getting people who are coming to court stressed out even more stressed. Why is intimidation so threatening to public trust and confidence? Because it gives, among other things, it gives a false positive to people who are appearing in court. So you appear before me, I order you to do something, and I say, Ms. Jones, do you understand what I've ordered you to do? And Ms. Jones, who is quite intimidated, says to herself, if I say no, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And if I say yes, I can get out of here quicker. So people who have legitimate questions about what they're supposed to do or why the judge did what they ordered, leave the courthouse not understanding this. And we cannot afford to have people leaving the court not understanding what happened or why it happened. So to just make it as dismal as we can, the National Center for State Courts public trust measures are the lowest since the National Center for State Courts began collecting the data. And if you look at it from a trend standpoint, this is a disaster waiting to happen. It keeps going down. There is no floor. And I believe we in Minnesota need to make significant changes in how we operate in order to stem the erosion of trust and then to rebuild it. From the public's perspective, courts are the least understood branch of government. There's this trite thing, some of you may have actually heard it. More people in the United States can name the 7 dwarfs than any members of the United States Supreme Court. And then the person that they can, this is not connected, but the person who is the most well-known of the United States Supreme Court justices is, of course, Justice Clarence Thomas. So we need to end up saying, look, the public doesn't understand the process. They don't understand what's going to happen at the hearing. We use language in courts that is quite foreign to people. And we need to change those things. Trust must be earned in each encounter. And that's true in anything we do in life. You have a relationship with somebody, I don't trust them. Or you have somebody who is a significant political figure. And if you look at why did Kevin McCarthy speakership end so prematurely? There were a number of people who said, we don't trust the guy. So here's what I think we can do in Minnesota to deal with building trust. The volume of cases that we have in court is our strength, not our weakness. If we can make the encounter that each person has when they come to court a quality experience, not that they'll necessarily win, but that their expectations are met, they felt like they were listened to, they left the courthouse understanding what happened, we have the chance to increase public trust and confidence in the courts. So I got to confess something to all of you. It's not that I like Walmart, but I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that I'm right. The people who run Walmart are not sitting down in Arkansas complaining to each other that we have too many customers and this is just a disaster, right? But you can, if you go to a judge's meeting or a court administrator's meeting or whatever they have, you will find many courts complaining about volume. Volume is actually the way we're going to change public understanding of courts. I'm not encouraging you to run out and divorce your significant spouse so that we can get you into court. But people come into court. We're a service organization. We're trying to resolve disputes. And we need to rethink how we come across to people. So I mentioned the magnetometers. Again, I'm not knocking the idea that security is not important. But if you go to many Walmarts, you have some old person waving their hand saying, "Welcome to Walmart." We don't have that in courts. We don't have a welcoming attitude towards people. I don't frequently, rarely actually, shop at Neiman Marcus. But my suggestion to you is sometime between now and the Christmas holidays, go to Neiman Marcus, go out to the Mall of America and stand there looking lost. I believe that within a relatively short period of time, a Neiman Marcus employee will come up and say, "Excuse me, sir, can I help you? Excuse me, ma'am, can I help you?" Then if you go down to any of the big urban courts, you go down to the Ramsey County District Court, the Hennepin County District Court, Anoka, Dakota, stand there looking lost, get there about 8:30 in the morning. And my belief is the likelihood is the security guard will kick you out at the end of the day. There's this disconnect. And so we need to have courts have much more the feel of Neiman Marcus than Walmart. It also has to do with the funding of courts. So there's a fair amount in the media about the funding of Minnesota courts. We're better funded than some and worse than others. Courts that are in fact well-run are perceived to be well-run and are well-funded. The rest are told to do more with less. And that's a problem for courts, is that we do not have the public really believing that we're really, really well run. And we need to develop a strategy to change that. So there was a famous speech given by Professor Roscoe Pound. Pound was then the dean of the Harvard Law School. In his speech, he said, which was entitled "The Causes of Popular Dissatisfaction with the administration of justice. And one of the key things that he said was, one reason that drives dissatisfaction with the administration of justice is the belief that the administration of justice is an easy task for which anyone is competent. You know, for a long time, I will candidly admit, I thought, yeah, I think Pound is right. I was as chief judge, as I mentioned, for much of the 1990s in Hennepin. Lots of political figures, county commissioners, legislators, city council members, mayors would say, why don't you do this in the administration of justice? And then they had some good suggestions, and some of them were pretty off the wall. But no one ever came to me and said, you know, we're having problems in the library. What do you think we ought to do there? So there's this disconnect, which is, even though I'm not learned in the law, I'm not a part of the court system, I got some really simple solutions. Why don't you do those things? I've now changed my mind. I actually think the administration of justice is an easy task if we make it simple and understandable, not only for the people in the court, but the people that we serve. So let me go back to Barbara Jordan. We all say, I think we all say, I'm certain that everyone who's here today will say, I want a justice system that is fair. And the problem is, up until relatively recently, there was no court in the United States that regularly and systematically measured its fairness. I think in deference to that history is we can't end up agreeing what the word fairness means, so we don't measure. We'll measure something that's easy. Filings are up. So the number of people who got divorced went up last year. Oh, we're much more busy. The police gave a lot more tickets. Oh, we're a lot more busy. The police gave fewer tickets. We're not so busy. Here's the problem about fairness. You can't end up defining fairness as, did I win? People do come to court wanting to win, no matter what kind of case. They would like to win. But you can't end up running a court system in which you say 79% of the people got convicted of drug cases, or 62% of the moms got custody of their kids. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't drive behaviors of judges or anybody else in the system. So that one doesn't work. What about outcome fairness? Did I get what I deserve? That one does get closer. So I can tell you that over a career, I've had people who I sentenced to prison, and I say, anything else you'd like to say, Mr. Smith? And Mr. Smith will say, thank you, Your Honor. No, he didn't really want to go to prison. I get that. But what outcome fairness says is, I understand what I did and I got what I deserve. Now, some of this can be driven by a court system that is not attentive to this detail. And let me give you this example. My wife, Susan Burke, is a judge. She's been a judge in Hennepin County since 2005. In 2005, we had our daughter, Kate. She was born in February. And in the first few years of having a child, I would take Kate to school. So I got to make sure Kate's up. Susan was much more into, I need to get to my hearing at 8:30. So I'd take Kate to wherever we needed to take her. I would come in. I love our daughter, Kate, but she was not then a morning person. And so, come on, Kate, we got to get going, was not an unusual thing to happen. And so I would come skating into the courtroom, pretty stressed out. I know this about myself. If I'm stressed, and I think this is true of almost any other judge, if I'm really stressed out, I need to be careful that I don't hurt somebody. So I come into the court, I'm really stressed out, I'm running late. It's a very busy calendar. First case comes up. It's really a nothing case. You're charged with noisy party at the University of Minnesota. It's a frat party gone wild. How do you plead guilty or not guilty? And I say, the defendant says $50, and I say, or it says guilty, and I say $50 fine. Second guy comes up. I recognize him. He's the guy from Animal House, or at least a sequel of the Animal House. He's in all the time for noisy party at the University of Minnesota. He's the one that orchestrates the noisy parties. So I say, he says guilty, and I say $200 fine. Third guy comes up. You're charged with noisy party at the University of Minnesota. How do you plead? And the guy says, I'd like time to consult with a lawyer. So why did that happen? Well, one reason could be this. First guy got a $50 fine, no explanation. Second guy got $200. He happened to be black, no explanation. Well, third guy's black, and he's saying, this doesn't look good. $50 for the white guy, $200 for the black guy. Now, how do you get, did I get what I deserve? First guy comes up. Sir, it appears you've never done this before. Is that true? Nope, never done it before. $50 fine. Second guy comes up. Mr. Smith, you and I have met before. You keep getting tickets by the University of Minnesota police for this. We gotta stop the behavior. And he says, yes, Your Honor, I understand. Now the $200 fine is understandable. And the third guy may very well say, well, I didn't do this before. I got what I deserve, which would be $50. The last one about fairness, though, was my case handled through fair procedures? And that's where courts now have the opportunity, some are seizing on it, to measure the fairness in their courts. In the early 1990s, I read an article by a distinguished scholar by the name of Tom Tyler. Tyler now teaches at Yale. He was at NYU. And the title of the article was, Why Do People Obey Judges' Orders? And I thought, hey, I'm a judge. I ought to figure that out. And I read the article. Tom Tyler and I have become friends, but it's that academic literature that is not, it's not particularly entertaining, although it's important to know. So I actually brought some academics in to meet with the judges in Hennepin to talk about the idea of how do you achieve fairness in courts. And so we spent a whole day with academics learning what social scientists tell us about fairness in courts. I'm going to do it in 2 minutes. Tyler and Lind, which is a school of thought, says that respectful and dignified treatment of disputants is the key to litigant satisfaction. Greenberg, who's at Ohio State, says it's providing explanations. Remember my example, noisy party, did it before, got to give explanations. All of the literature on social science research says if you can achieve procedural fairness, you get higher compliance with orders. So the thing is, people come to court wanting to win, but they recognize that it's a human process. And if certain things are met, they're willing to go along with an order, even though they may disagree with it. It has to be treated with respect. They have to understand it, and they have to believe that it's unbiased. That's the keys for courts becoming more effective. So the state of California for many years did some serious research about how do what drives people's feelings about courts. Outcome favorability, if you see that in the brown or tan, it's not that important. It is important, but it's not that important. Outcome fairness is another way of looking at it. But the bottom line is, was I heard? Was I listened to? Did I understand what's going on? That's what really gets people to accept court decisions. Now, if you don't believe that I'm correct, there's a 2008 study that shows that perceived fairness triggers brain reactions similar to eating chocolate or seeing a pretty face. My hope today is to convince you that the courts in Minnesota need to change, but they don't need to end up serving chocolate kisses at the magnetometer to develop public trust and confidence in courts. The social scientists say there are 4 components to achieving fairness. I don't know, I would use that language, but this is the language of academics, so we'll adopt it. The first is voice, the second is neutrality, the third is respect, and the last is a trustworthy authority. People want the opportunity to tell their side of the story and have their stories told to a judge who listens carefully. How effective do you believe that Minnesota judges are at this? They clearly, the vast majority of Minnesota judges want to do what's right. But there are impediments that get created. The intimidation. I don't want to speak up. The volume of cases gets to be an excuse of why I don't give an explanation, or cynicism can develop with judges in which you end up saying, whoops. You end up saying, I've heard this before. You might have heard it before, but if we were doctors, we've heard patients who come in and say, I have a pain in my side, and I get it 3 or 4 times a week from different patients. You don't just say, suck it up. So we need to end up figuring out how to make sure Minnesotans, when they come to court, get voice. Some of it can be, there's some courts that now do trauma training. So they question all of the routine processes, tearing down the courtroom to figure out how to communicate more respectfully and effectively. And what the trauma-informed judicial practice is, you can get much, much better at this. So here's an angry judge, and that's a problem when it comes to respect. But it's another problem, which is this. Neutrality is important, that second component of procedural fairness. But if it's applied improperly, it can mask that the judge cares. There is a strain of thought significantly by Chief Justice John Roberts, who said judges are just like umpires. All they do is call balls and strikes. With all due respect to the Chief Justice, I don't think that that's true. We in the state court system deal with many people who are in trauma. And we need to be careful to end up showing that we do care about the people who are appearing before us as human beings. So this idea about judicial emotion is, Senator Grassley said at Justice Sotomayor's hearing, a judge's most critical qualification is the capacity to set aside one's own feelings. And she responded, we are not robots who listen to evidence and don't have feelings. It's not necessarily good to just mask those feelings. Respect. People come into court. A lot of times they come into court really concerned about something that's not particularly a strong legal case, but it's important to them. So we need to pay better attention to a litigant's experience, what brought them to court, what are their concerns. To build trust, pretty simple. Was the person listened to? Were the litigants treated with respect? Do they understand what the decision was and why the decision was made? So let's go to video. We're doing this by a webinar. Webinars, video have become a significant part of our court system. I would suggest we need to be a little bit more cautious about how convenient video is. So there's a new study right off the press, funded by the State Justice Institute, which found that, well, let me set the stage up. Random studies are not done by courts very often. Random study would be one person goes in this line, one goes in the other. You see it in medicine all of the time, in which you have some people get placebos and other people get the real medicine. They found, at least in the Utah study, that regardless of the medium, that is, did you come to court yourself or did you come by video, the time to disposition stayed the same, the appearance rates stayed the same, but the exception was the litigants' perceived fairness was significantly lower in remote proceedings. So 84% of those, this is Utah, 84% of those that appeared in person responded yes to the question, did the court treat you fairly today? 84% is not a bad number, but look at the next one, which is if they were remote, it's 65%. I believe that Minnesota needs to be cautious about the use of Zoom. I'm not suggesting we don't need to use it, but we need to end up having more study done of what the impact of these Zoom proceedings are. We cannot afford, with this declining public trust and confidence in courts, to contribute to the problem by using a medium that really isn't working for people. I like Donald Sutherland. I hope that you guys do too, but this is kind of interesting. And I was baffled that here's an actor who has something that's really important for us to know, which is one measurement is worth 1,000 expert opinions. Everybody in the justice system, going back to Roscoe Pound, hey, it's easy, I can give you my opinion. We need more measurement. This is the Minnesota Judicial Branch's website. It's got a ton of information on it. Not all of it is particularly helpful. E-filing, and how do I e-file? How do I find an interpreter? All that other stuff. These are very interesting things, but it really doesn't tell the public how well is your team doing. You know, if you look this morning in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune and you look at the standings of the Vikings, the Timberwolves, you can see this is how we're doing. and it doesn't really tell you that very easily. You can actually go find reports and publications. It's not easy. I actually had to get a staff member to help me find this on the state's website. And it's got a lot of information, some of which is very current: filings, disposition of cases. That's pretty easy. Where we're weak is you go there and you look at fairness, is the Minnesota courts don't regularly measure and assess their fairness. They do it occasionally, but it's not a core part of how you develop accountability to the public. So we did a study years ago when I was chief judge. 40% of the American public believe that judges' orders are not understandable. Now, I don't believe that we, the judges, are that bad, but what if we are? What if 40% of the people leaving court don't understand what happened? So we took domestic violence defendants, interviewed them 5 minutes after the bail or sentencing decision, and then asked them, do you understand the judge's order and why the judge did what they did? Interestingly enough, the judges didn't know that we were doing this, although I think realistically by mid-morning they did get a sense of it. 13 different judges were surveyed. Several judges got 100%, but at least one judge, 40% of the defendants within 5 minutes didn't understand what happened. And that's not acceptable. Now you go back and you say, well, geez, 100%, that's pretty hard to get in a courtroom. I fly a lot. I fly perhaps more than I should. And if I fly into O'Hare, I'm looking at air traffic controllers who are going to get it 100% right. Because if you fly to O'Hare and they get it 99% right, there will be a crash or a near miss every day of the year. So we need to end up becoming better and more sophisticated in making sure that people understand court-ordered conditions. And the bottom line is this could get you data that you don't like. So you can't end up putting your hands in your ears and say, I don't want to hear this. We live in an era in which people want to end up, businesses want to have, they want to know what their customers are saying, and we need to do that in the court. The most effective strategy for preserving judicial independence is to have a judiciary committed to accountability, and that's where I wanted to end my presentation. How should Minnesota courts be accountable to the Minnesota public? And this is what my suggestion is. We need to adopt a Minnesota Litigants' Bill of Rights. 100% of the time you will be listened to. If you click on the website of the Minnesota judiciary in the vision that I have for the future, you will see prominently displayed what percentage of people believe that the judge listened to them when they came into court. And if you look at the website in the future, 100% of the time you'll be treated with respect. We need to know that. We don't need to do it every 4 or 5 years. We need to do it regularly. And then we need to know 100% of the time you will understand court orders and why they were issued. These are rights that every Minnesotan has or should have, and we need to move the judiciary in that direction. And if we do, the volume of cases that we have will be an opportunity to change attitudes about the courts. Vince Lombardi once said, perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence. there are a lot of judges who I believe, even if we never did this, 100% of the people will feel like they were listened to, 100% of the people will be treated with respect, and they'll understand the decisions. But going back to my study is we need to get meaningful feedback to judges that we actually are doing the perfection that we achieve, that we try to achieve. And that really means we need to get data to people on how you're doing. And then the last part about the Litigants' Bill of Rights really is we need more precinct workers for changing public attitudes. I'll close with this is I did a lot of work in Iowa after the 3 Supreme Court justices were defeated for the 2010 decision, which found that gay marriage was protected under the Iowa Constitution. The vast majority of court employees really weren't part of they didn't understand what was going on. The court leadership never made any attempt to explain what's happening. Now, you could say, well, generally courts don't go out and try to convince the staff that the decision in State versus Smith is correct. I get that. But if you ended up saying, we want to make sure people are listened to, then you can get people to understand why we are trying to become a lot more fair. So I've got a question. Let's see what it says. How do people come to court feel listened to when judges are more concerned with efficiency, looking at how long a case rather than... I actually think you're right. I think that because the metrics that are given to judges are weighted too much towards efficiency and too little towards fairness, if you ended up saying, I get a report card, so I'm a big golfer, I keep my score. If I end up coming at the end of the day, end of the month, end of the quarter, and I look at my scorecard as a judge and I say, a significant number of people don't feel like they are listened to when they come into court before me. And I look at the norm, which is everybody else, and I'm doing worse than them. I think that's a way of motivating people to get better at what they do. So do we have any other questions, thoughts? If you type in, here we go. No other questions here. Probably a bad idea to turn, yeah. Won't call on anybody. Well, I'm 5 minutes early, and if we don't have any other questions, I thank you very much for being part of this. My hope is that this conference will move people, that we will move people to make this a better justice system. So my closing message to each of you is this. If you know a judge, if you know a legislator, if you know people who are who can move people, or we organized to take this speaker from last night, we need a Minnesota Litigants' Bill of Rights. We need to put at the forefront of the Minnesota judiciary, we regularly measure and assess our fairness. We do not accept people feeling like they were not listened to. We do not accept that we have people of color who believe they are not listened to the same way that white people are. We do not need gender differences in our court system. We need 100% of the people who leave our courthouse believing they were listened to, treated with respect, and they understand their decision. So thank you very much for joining me.